Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to be showing you how to build out a real-time chat application with React.js and an awesome new platform that I've recently fallen in love with called Appwrite, which is going to be handling the backend part of this application. So the purpose of this tutorial is to build out a minimalist application that has a lot of features that you would need in apps today. So things like reading and writing to a database, handling things like user authentication, which we all know can be a real pain to build out from scratch. Appwrite makes this insanely easy, and things like real-time features like a chat application, or maybe you need real-time notifications in your application. You're going to see how to do all of this with Appwrite and React.js on the front end while building out a pretty cool little chat application. So if you haven't heard of Appwrite yet, it's a backend as a service platform, and it comes on the scene as an open source alternative to something like Firebase. So it's making a lot of headway in the markets. It's getting really exciting seeing this platform take off. So before we get into an introduction of what Appwrite is and how it works, let's just go ahead and demo our application so we can see what we're going to build before we get started. Okay, so this is what our application is going to look like in the end. So we just have this chat thread. I opened up two tabs so we can actually demonstrate the real-time capabilities. So first of all, users can register. Once they register, they can log in. So we'll log this user in, and let's just go ahead and send a message so we can see this actually appear in real time. So we'll just say, hey there. And if we send this, we're going to notice both users got that message. So the sender's message looks a little bit different than the receiver's. So for each user, they're going to see that message differently. We can just respond. We can say hi, and that message is transmitted. So each user actually has the ability and permissions to delete their own messages. So we do limit those permissions. So Dennis here can only delete messages that Dennis sent, and Solimita only has the ability, or that trash icon, to delete messages that she sent. So the application itself is not going to have any direct messaging. It's not going to have multiple rooms. We're just sticking to one single chat room so we can focus on the CRUD operations, authentication, and the ability to send messages in real time. Okay, so let's talk about Appwrite. I want to do a quick demonstration of the console here, talk about the features, and just do a little walkthrough before we actually get started. So before we do that though, I do want to summarize what a backend as a service is for those of you that don't know it. I'm actually with you. I'm relatively new to this world. I typically build out my backend with Scratch using something like Python and Django. I know a lot of people use Express.js with JavaScript or Node.js, and then there's the PHP Laravel developers and all the other backend frameworks that come with it. So I'm in that world. I totally get it. So a backend as a service, and my best description and summary of it is kind of like what it sounds like. It's a backend tool, or a tool that allows you to build out the backend without having to build out and manage that entire infrastructure by yourself. So things like the database, things like file storage, authentication, you usually get some kind of tool to come with it, an SDK that allows you to build out the backend really fast and focus on the front end development so you can build out applications faster and not have to deal with all that backend stuff and building things out from scratch. So it really can make your life a lot easier. There's pros and cons to using it. We won't get into that, but that just kind of summarizes what it is. So for Appwrite, so this is the Appwrite website. Let's talk about this. So first of all, Appwrite, as I mentioned before, it's an alternative, open source alternative to something like Firebase. And with Appwrite, we have something called Appwrite Cloud that we can use that's currently in beta that has just recently come out, but you can also set up a local instance of it. So this is run in a Docker container. You can get that set up and do the entire deployment on your own. So for this tutorial, we're going to use Appwrite Cloud. It's going to make things a lot easier. It's a matter of signing up with an account, going ahead and building out our application, setting up a database, and we're good to go. So this right here, the first thing you'll see is the Appwrite console. It's going to give you all the stats to your application. We can see all the requests coming into it, the bandwidth, real-time connections, all the databases, users, and so on. So really pretty cool UI here where we can kind of manage everything. So if we scroll down, let's talk about the features here. So first of all, as we mentioned earlier, you get a database. This is a real-time database that we can read and write to. We actually have a UI that we can kind of manage everything from. We have authentication. This is a lovely feature because I usually build out my own authentication. So that was really refreshing to use this. And then we have file storage. So something like an Amazon S3 bucket. Appwrite gives us the ability to store media files, things like images, videos, PDFs, whatever kind of files we need to store. So we also have cloud functions, so we can write in our own custom functionality. We won't get into that right now. And then a lot of other real-time features. So we'll demonstrate some of these later. So a lot of the features that Firebase has. So yeah, it's kind of, again, it's just an alternative to it. So if you know Firebase, you should be pretty familiar with this. That's what Appwrite is. So let's go ahead and sign into our console. So I already created an account. So you go ahead and create an account here. We're using Appwrite Cloud. Again, normally you can set up a local instance of this, but we're going to use Appwrite Cloud. So first of all, we have our project, so you can create a project here. I already created my demo. We'll actually walk through all of this once we start the tutorial. So this is my project here. I can see all the stats to it. I just set this up before this video. And if we look in here, we can actually go ahead and go into authentication and see all the users. So we just demonstrated that chat application. Well, we can see Dennis and Sulamita right here. So we see the user. We can even modify the user if we need. We can go ahead and actually update information. So we get this whole graphical user interface to where we can actually work with this data. We can create teams to set up user permissions. Maybe you have admins, super admins, different type of user permissions that can all be created in your console, and then also through the SDK here. And we can see usage of each user. So we can see how many sessions we have, how many times where users logged in, all that kind of data for the user, along with authentication mechanisms. So right now we're doing email and password sign in. We can do magic URL, JSON web tokens, phone numbers, and all these auth providers that go with it. So that's our authentication section. If we go into databases, to create a database, it's as easy as naming your database. And then once we go into it, so I have this development database, I created a table or a collection here. So we have this collection for our messages. If I go in here we can actually see the chat messages and all the details that go with it. So we see the chat messages. If we want to add in an attribute, so we can actually go into attributes, we see we have a body, a user ID, and a username. So these are all strings. We can create a new attribute, name it whatever we want, set the field type, and work with this information. So that is our messages table here. So we can see all the events that already took place. So you get a lot of information with this, and that is the databases. So we create a collection, create the tables, add the attributes, and there we go. So if we go into functions, we're not going to demonstrate this. This is where you can create your custom functions here. This is where you can manage them. We have our file storage. So I just created a test bucket. Here I added an image. So here we go. I can go ahead and open this image, grab that file URL, and here we go. So it's kind of hard to see the URL. Maybe we can try to zoom in here. So it's cloud Appwrite and then my URL to this bucket image. So it's kind of like an S3 bucket. We can store all this information here, so we can go ahead and add new images. Again, this is all done through the SDK. This is just our interface to work with things if we need. So that is the Appwrite console. Let's go ahead and set up our React application. We're going to start from scratch. I'll show you where you can get the source code, and then we're going to go ahead and create a new application, connect it to our React app, and we'll just start building from there. Okay, so before we get started, I'd highly recommend you check out the source code provided in the video description. There will be a link to the GitHub repo, and here you'll find the final source code to the project itself. So I'd recommend checking it out beforehand, just review it and use it to compare against your code as you're coding along here. There will also be instructions added here on how to get this set up locally. So it's a good reference to have as you're coding along. And at some point, we are actually going to need to go into this CSS folder and just take the CSS from here. This is a place where we're just going to copy and paste here. I don't want to focus on CSS in this tutorial. So we're just going to go ahead and grab this code at some point as we build out our application. So make sure you check out that link because we will need it. So let's go ahead and just jump into our desktop here. And we're just going to set up our React app. So I'm going to use Vite. You could use Create React App. This part's up to you. So I prefer Vite as of late. So we're just going to do npm create, and then we'll just do Vite at latest. So we're going to go ahead and give it a prompt here. So it's going to ask us for our project name, and we're just going to call this chat tut. So for chat tutorial, and we're going to set up a React application, and we're just going to use JavaScript. So I'm not going to use TypeScript here. So if you're using Vite, you're also going to need to go ahead and open up the project and run an install. So I'm going to do this from VS Code. So we'll just go ahead and open up our application, go to chat tut, and we'll open up this terminal. So this is the project that Vite just set up for us. And we're just going to go ahead and run npm install, and this will set up all the installations that we need. And once this is done, what I'm going to do is just run the server, see what we have, and then start cleaning up some code. So if you're using create React app, I believe it's npm start, but we're just going to do npm run dev with Vite. And that should open our project up on port 5173. So let's go ahead and check this out, see what we have. And here is our application. So let's start cleaning this up here. So we'll go into source app.css. We're just going to go ahead and do control all. We're going to delete all that, save it, remove everything from index.css, and that should remove the styling. And then we'll go into app.jsx. We don't need the Vite or React logo. We don't need the use state hook, and we don't need this count anymore. And I'm also just going to go ahead and remove everything between the fragments here. So that should leave us with an empty page. And at this point, what I want to do is just go ahead and create our room page and just add in some text so we see it, and then we'll start setting up the backend. So let's go ahead and create a new file. So this will be in the pages folder that we're going to create, and we're going to call this room.jsx. And I have a code snippet where I can just type in React arrow function component exported, so RAFCE. This is called ES7 React Redux code snippets, and it's an extension with the VS Code that you can use, and it just gives me the scaffolding for my components. So you can write this out from scratch. I prefer that code snippet. So we'll just say room, we'll add that text in, and then we'll bring this into app.jsx, import it. So we'll import the room, and we'll add in routing and authentication later, but for now we're just gonna have one page as we start with the CRUD operation. So the first thing I wanna do is set up the backend. We're gonna render out some messages, and then we're gonna start creating messages, and then we'll build in everything from there as we add in React Router. So let's go ahead and check this out. Here is our room, and we are set up. Okay, so at this point, we wanna set up our backend, and then we wanna configure our application with Appwrite. So let's go ahead and go into Appwrite. So appwrite.io. We're gonna use a console here, so let's just go ahead and create an account, sign in. And we just saw this, so what I'm gonna do is create a new project here. So we see our demo project. What I'm gonna do is go ahead and create a new project, and we're gonna call this tutorial. So that's gonna be our project, and we do automatically get a project ID. We could create this manually, but it's just gonna auto-generate one for us if we don't set it. So we have our tutorial project. Now in here, we get this interface here, and we want to create a web app. So that's what we're gonna use. We're gonna use the web SDK. So go ahead and click here, and we're gonna give this a name. We're gonna call this My Chat App. And for the host name, so this is gonna be, I guess if we highlight it here, it's gonna be the host name that we're gonna use to interact with our application in a production or local environment. So right now, it already prompts us to add in localhost later on if you're deploying on Vercel, whatever that domain name is, we're just gonna go ahead and add that here. So for now, we're just gonna interact with it through localhost, and we don't need the port number. So we're just gonna set the base up here, and I wanna remove my face, or at least move it to the other side so you can see this next part. And at this point, we just click the next button, and this shows us how to install Appwrite and how to configure it. So let's go ahead and just copy this to clipboard. We'll go back to our editor here. We'll turn off our server, and let's just go ahead and run this install. So npm install Appwrite. That'll get Appwrite set up for us. And the next step here is to go ahead and import this client object. So we're gonna copy this to clipboard, and what I'm gonna do is just add in all my Appwrite configuration inside of a folder called Appwrite config. So we'll just do Appwrite config with a capital C.js, and let's bring this in. Let's go to the next step here. And now we have this client object. We're gonna set up an instance of it and connect to our application. So we're gonna copy this to clipboard here, and you wanna make sure you hide this information. So you wanna put this inside of environment variables. For this tutorial, I'm gonna leave it as is, but you do want to hide things like your project or your app ID and so on. So we're just gonna go ahead and set this up here and then export it because we are gonna use it later. So we'll just do this as a default export, and we're gonna export the client object inside of the Appwrite config file. Okay, so there's a little bit more that we still have to do here, but let's continue walking through this process. And let's see, what's the next step? So at this point, we are ready to go. Our project is set up, and this is our fresh dashboard. So to show you how to get back to this project, we'll go back to the Appwrite console, and here we go. We see the tutorial, we click on here, and we're in the console. Okay, so from here, we already walked through databases. Let's go ahead and actually create a new database, a new collection, which is gonna be just a table in a database, and then we're gonna create documents in that collection. So those are going to be instances of whatever item we're adding to that database. So typically you have a production level database, a development database, maybe a testing database. So we're just going to pretend that we're already ready to go into production. We're going to call this production. Again, we get an automatic generated ID here, so we don't have to specify anything here. And inside of this database, we're going to create a collection, and this is going to be our messages table. So our messages collection, and it's also going to have its own ID. We're going to need these values later to reference as we're building things out. So in here, what I want to do is just go ahead and actually create a few documents, so a few messages, just so we can see how things work. So we want to create some attributes. If you're comparing this to an Excel table, these would be like columns inside of an Excel table. If you were creating like models, if you were using a backend like Python or even Node.js and Express, these would be attributes in that model. So we're going to create that. Let's go ahead and we're going to create a body. So every message needs a body. This value will be a string for the size. Let's just say the maximum value could be 1,000, and we want to make sure that it's required. So we cannot create a document without having something in this value. Now, there are some default attributes that are already created, and we'll see those. Some of those are going to be like created as, so it's going to generate a timestamp for when this value was created, and there'll be a few others, but we'll just kind of see what we need as we go. So for now, we just have the body, and we do want to connect this to a user later. So we're just going to do user ID, and we're going to store a user's ID value so we can get a particular user's messages. So I think a user ID shouldn't be more than 100 maybe, but we'll just set that to 250. We won't require it because for now we're not going to have any users. And let's just say user name. So we also want to just hard code that value in for now. And again, we'll just do 250 for the name. We won't require it. And our document now has these three attributes. So only one of these is required. So the next step here is let's just go ahead and create a document. Let's create some messages, and we'll just say for the first one, we'll say hello world. So this UI is really nice to actually be able to work with it and test things out directly in here. So if I create a document, I can even go back in here, view this document, I can edit it, I can see all this information about it. Really neat to have this. I can see the activity. Let's see, well, I guess we don't have anything right now. So we'll just go back and let's create one more. So we'll just say this was created in the console. So why I'm creating this is I want to be able to actually query these items as our first step from our React app. So once we connect to our application here, I want to first show you how to query items from the database, and then we'll see how to add items in here. So we have these documents. Now, in theory, you would think, oh, I can just query the database and make requests here. Well, we also have to set permissions, and we can set permissions at the collection level or at the document level. So what I mean by this is if we go into settings here for our messages collection, we can actually update our permissions and decide who can do what with our database or with this specific collection. So if we look here, we have permissions for any user. That means anybody can make requests, and then we'll specify the types. We can say only guest users, permissions for users that are authenticated. Maybe you create a team of admins or so on. So different users you can actually give different permissions to. So at this point, we're just going to say any user can create, they can read, they can update and delete collections or documents in this collection. So this is how we can add these permissions to a specific collection. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to show you the error that might happen if you forget to set these, because I forgot this a few times and I was trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. And it was because of this error that I was having this issue. So what I want to do is actually remove these permissions, run into that error so you're familiar with it when you see it. That way it just kind of sticks in your brain. So we just removed those permissions from this collection, and let's try to query this database. So there's a little bit more setup that we have to add in. So let's go ahead and go to our documentation. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually just going to follow the documentation so you get an idea of how to use it, and then you can use it as you need as you go along here. So in our documentation, I'm going to change this to white mode. I feel like this might be a little bit easier to see. It's kind of hard to zoom in because if I zoom in, it removes that left column. But let's just zoom out. Hopefully you can view this part from a desktop, and let's go into databases. So I want to see how we can query the database for a specific item. So we went to databases. Just want to make sure you can see that. And I think what I can do is actually at this point just move my face back to the right here. So in databases, we have these instructions on how to create, list, get a single document, update, and delete. So we'll just keep referencing this. So let's go to listing a particular document. So we can actually use this REST API. We're not going to do this right now. There's a few more steps that you have to do to use that. We're just going to use the SDK. So specifically, we want to use the web SDK. So in here, we actually get the source code and the details of what we need. So in order to list a document, we need to provide the database ID and the collection that we want to list out. And then there's options on how to pass in search queries and add in different things, which we'll work with later. So let's see this example request. So first of all, in order to make this request, we need this databases object right here. So we need to initialize it. Then we need to go ahead and call databases dot, we're in create document. So let's go to list. Sorry, got ahead of myself there. We're going to go into databases.list documents. That's the command. And we pass in the ID and the collection. Those are the two required parameters to query our database. So let's go ahead and take this databases object and initialize it. So I'm just going to copy this right here. Again, use the documentation. Even in this tutorial, it'd be nice to use it so you can really get an idea of what's going on here. So we're going to go ahead and create this databases variable. Let's export it. So it'll be a named export. And we need to import databases. Okay, so we pass in the client object into databases, we created it, and we exported it. So that's how we make that request. What I want to do is also get this database ID and the collection ID. So let's actually jump in here and bring those and export those from this Appwrite config file. So we're going to do export const, and we're just going to call this project underscore ID. So we're going to need a few of these values, and that will be a string. We're also going to export the, let's see, the database ID, database underscore ID. So this will be our production database, and we're going to export the collection ID. So we're going to do collection underscore ID, and specifically this will be messages. So we need to get these values. So we'll go back into our console and let's grab these values. So we have our messages collection. So first let's grab the database ID, bring that in. Then we will go into the messages collection, grab the collection ID. And we also want the project ID. So project ID up here. And now we should be good to go. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually go to our room and make a request here. So we're going to test this out. We'll go into room.jsx here, and let's just go ahead and import databases. And that's going to be from Appwrite config. So it just goes ahead and adds that import. We're going to want to add in some state. So we're going to do use state and use effect. And we want to query the database when the page first loads. So in here, let's just go ahead and call this get data or get messages. So we're going to do const get messages. And let me just make sure you can see everything, because I've done this before where I've recorded and then found out that something was blocked or wasn't recording. That's always a pain. So let's just go ahead and make this an async function. Get messages. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, okay. So got ahead of myself. Okay, so we have this async function, and we want to go ahead and call this on use effect. So we're going to do use effect, and we're going to call this on the first load. So we are going to throw in an empty dependency array, and we want to call get messages. Okay, so in here, we're just going to go ahead and do const response. So we want to get that response right away. We'll do await, and we can access databases dot, and let me fix this indentation. We'll do dot list documents. And what did we need here? Well, we needed the database ID. So we'll import that database ID and collection ID of messages. So we'll just do database ID, collection ID, and that should be it. So at this point, let's just go ahead and console this out and see what we get. And remember, we're going to get an error. So if you get ahead of me here and then pause the video and start trying to debug it, well, let's not do that because we want to see this first. Okay, so we're going to go back here. Let's go into our application. Let's check this out. And let's refresh it. Oh, and I didn't turn on my server, so I probably should do that. So npm run dev. All right, let's see this. Okay, so the error we're seeing here is the current user is not authorized to perform this action or request. So you might see this a few times as you're learning how the permissions work within Appwrite, because there's different levels that we can set. So the reason why this is working is the type of user that we are. Well, we're not a guest, we're just any user. We don't have any permissions, we're not authenticated, nothing like that. So we're gonna go into settings and say, okay, at this point, we want to be able to still make requests. It's not safe to give any user create, read, update, and delete abilities. Maybe we can have them read, but we shouldn't have them do all of these things. So we'll change this later. But for now, any user should be able to make all these requests. So now if I refresh this error should go away. And here we go. We see this response. We see 2 documents. We see a total of 2 with the array 2 documents. If we look at this object, here we see the collection ID, we see created at the database ID, the ID of the value itself, the body, that's hello world, the user ID, which we haven't set, and the username. Okay, so this is all great. Let's go ahead and just render this out and we'll move to the next step. So we're gonna render this out and then we'll actually start creating items. So at this point, this is all just gonna be some React stuff. We wanna go ahead and create a messages array. We wanna have an update function, so not set update, but set messages. We want to have a setter here for use state. And this will be an empty array. So what we want to do is when we get the messages, we want to just go ahead and render these out. We want to set the state, so we'll just do set messages, and that's going to be response.documents. Okay, so we have that, and in here we can just go ahead and let's create a div around this, and we just want to render all messages out. So we're just going to say messages.map, and we'll pass in the message itself, use an arrow function, and we have the message ID. So what we're going to do is create a container, and with React we always need a key so the virtual DOM can update things. So we're just going to set the key to message.id, and the ID has the $sign before it. So after that, we're just going to go ahead and create another div, and I'm going to start slowly styling a little bit. And with my styling, I'm going to have a div with a span tag for the message body. So we're going to do span, and we'll just do message.body. So we want to be able to see this, and let's actually first render that out. So here we go. We see hello world. This was created in the console. Everything's working correctly. And let's also create a message header. And the header will eventually it'll store the sender's name and the created at timestamp. So we'll go ahead and pass in a paragraph tag, and we'll just say message.created at. And that's going to be an ugly timestamp that we're going to style later. But there we go. We have our messages, and that looks good. Well, it doesn't look good, but it's good because we've done some work here. So at this point, let's just go ahead and grab some CSS. Let's bring this in. Let's make this look a little bit nicer, and then we'll move on to creating things. So if you want to just kind of fast forward through this, you can if you don't care about the styling, but I just want to take care of this so it's more satisfying to work with. So inside of our GitHub repo, go into source and index.js or index.css, and we're just going to copy all of this. And I wrote this up pretty quick, so if you're a CSS pro, don't mock me here. I just put this together. That's not my specialty. I just did the best I could, use some CSS variables, and we added that in here. So here's all the settings. We have some default settings with some fonts, colors, and so on. And what I want to focus on is just rendering out some buttons and the styling for the messages itself. So we have a room container that we're going to set up right now. We're going to have the message wrapper, so that class, message header, and a message body. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So here's our styling, and I'm going to jump into my demo code so I can see what I'm doing, and then we'll just start piecing this together. Okay, so first of all, inside of our room, let's go ahead and actually wrap this in a main tag, and we'll just give this a class name of container, and we'll just peek at the output every single time. So I thought the container was supposed to do something. I'm trying to remember what the container did. Should set a max width. Oh, I think I'm just so zoomed in that, yeah, it doesn't. Okay, so it actually did center it. I'm just so zoomed in that you won't be able to see it. So that should center everything for you. And then after that, we're going to create a room container. So inside of this div right here, we want to create another div around this. So we're going to wrap this messages output because that's going to have its own wrapper here. So let's see. We're going to wrap this right now, create another div. And this is going to have the class of messages container or room container, hyphen container, so 2 dashes. And we can just take this closing div and paste this down here. So the messages should have their own div. Okay, so here we go. We added some more styling, and I'll just zoom out for now. And inside of the messages themselves, we're just going to go ahead and add in a class here. And this is going to be message double hyphen wrapper. Okay, we have that. And then we have the message header, hyphen header. And for the message timestamp, let's go ahead and just add this in. And this is actually going to be a small tag, and we'll just add in a class of message double hyphen, actually single hyphen here. So I might update the code to be double hyphen. So if that doesn't work, just make sure to check that out. And there we go. So it did style that a little bit differently. And then the message body. So we just want to wrap this, and we're almost done with the base styling. So I just wanted to set this up here. So the message body here, let's see, this will be message double hyphen body. And if you saw in the demo, the body here at this point is just going to be red, but the sender, their messages will always appear with the outline. So I wanted to separate those. We'll change that up a little bit later if we need, but I think that's going to be it for now. So we just have, let's see, the message wrapper. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Messages wrapper. Okay, so that I needed to fix that. Okay, so that looks a lot better. So let's move on to creating a message. So let's jump into the documentation and see how we create an item. So now we can go back to the create request. So we have list and we have create a document. So in order to create a document, we need the database ID. So you're going to start seeing a theme. We need a collection ID and then the document ID. So at this point, there's actually a method that we can import and use. It's called id.unique. So we can just import this and it'll automatically generate an ID for us. We can create our own ID, but this way you get more, it's more of a theme with how Appwrite does things. So you're able to stay consistent with that. Oh, and then you also need the data. So the payload of the object that you're sending. At this point, it's just gonna be an object with an attribute of message body or the body of the message, and then any permissions we wanna set for this and so on. So let's go ahead and look at this. So we're also gonna do database.create document, and here we go. So we're gonna run this, and then this part's gonna be a little bit different. So at this point, what I want to do is just go ahead and create the function, and we're going to call this, so we're going to do const, and we'll just do handle submit. So this is going to be for our form. We're going to have a form, and when we submit it, this is the part that takes care of everything. So by default, when you submit a form, the page usually refreshes. So we want to do e.prevent default, prevent default. We want to make sure that it doesn't refresh that. And then we're just going to go ahead and call, let's actually set this in a response. So we'll do response is equal to await databases dot create document. So when we create this document, let's actually just go ahead and indent this, and we're going to say this is the database ID. So we need to send this. This is going to send a post request, and then we want to pass in the collection ID. And at this point, let's see, we also want to pass in the document ID. So let's go ahead and run a quick import. So what we can do is actually import the ID class, I believe it's a class, the ID class from Appwrite. So this is going to generate a document ID for us. So we want to pass that in as the third parameter, I believe. So we can just do id.unique, pass that in, and then we need the payload. Okay, so the payload is just going to be an object, and I'll set this up right here. We'll just do payload. And we just want to set the body, and that's going to be the message body state that we're about to set. So we're kind of doing this backwards here. So we're going to set that body. So let's go ahead and actually create the state. So as we fill out the form here, we're going to have a message body value. So that's going to be that form input field. And then we're going to call set message body. So we're going to create it, and with useState, we're just going to throw in an empty string. So that's going to be an empty string. That's the message body. So when we submit it, we're sending whatever we have here as the payload to create document to the collections, or to the messages collection, with this ID, with this payload. So we're just sending the body at this point. And then once that's done, what we want to do is just set message body to an empty string, because we want to reset that form. Okay, so when do we submit this? What we want to do here is we just want to go ahead and create the form just below the room container and above this messages wrapper. So let's go ahead and create this form here. So we'll do form, close this off here, and I'm just going to go ahead and pass in the ID of message form, and this will give it the styling based off of what I have in that CSS file, so message form, and that's double hyphen. Now inside of this form, we're going to have an input field that I'm going to wrap in a div, and I added the div for styling. So we'll just do, actually it's not going to be an input field, it's going to be a text area. I want it to have multiple lines and more flexibility on how I work with this. So we have this text area, and in the text area, we're going to make sure that it's required. Then we want to make sure that we have a max length, and that's going to be, can't believe I'm setting this to 1,000, but it's going to be 1,000 for now. We'll leave it there. Placeholder, we'll just say something. I guess that's a good prompt. I don't know why, to me, when I see say something, it almost sounds aggressive. It sounds like a street fight to me. Okay, so on change, as users are adding in messages, or as they're typing, what we want to do is go ahead and get that value, and we want to update the state here. So we're just going to do set message body, and that's going to be the value of this field. So e.target.value. Okay, so on change, as they're typing, we're going to go ahead and add that in. And then we also want to set, actually, I guess the value can go after this. We want to set the value to the message body. Message body. Okay, so here we update the message body. Here we message. Okay, there we go. Talking and thinking doesn't always work too well. Okay, so we have the message body, and I think we're good for the form. And we also have the input field that we need to add, but let's just make sure everything's working. Okay, so here we go. As we're typing, that all checks out. Let's see if we have any errors. Let's go ahead and inspect. No errors. Okay, looking good. Okay, so now what we can do is go ahead and add in the submit button. So we'll just do a div around this, and we're going to do input type of submit. And the value will just be send. So we'll just do value send. And this is all tedious stuff. This part you should be familiar with. We should be focusing on the Appwrite stuff, but we do have to take care of this part. So I know that everyone's here to actually see how this works. Okay, so we have that send button. Do we have an error? No? Okay, so the send button doesn't look so good right now, so I do have some CSS or some classes that we can add to it. So we'll do class name, and this is going to be btn -- secondary. Okay, so we'll throw that in. That should give us some styling, and I want this button to be on the right, which is why I put a wrapper around this. And we'll just do class name, and this is going to be send dash btn dash dash wrapper. Okay, so there we go. Now on submit, when we submit this form, let's just go ahead and add this in. So on submit, let's just go ahead and pass in handle submit. So when we submit the form, let's just make sure everything's good. We prevent default, take that state, pass it in as a payload to create document, create the ID. We're passing it into the right collection, and then we reset it. So I actually want to console out the response. Let's just make sure everything goes good. So we should get back the instance of our object when we create it. So we'll just do created, and then the next parameter will be response. Let's see what this looks like. So we'll just go to inspect. Okay, and if I say test send, here we go. So it hasn't rendered out here, but now we see created, and we can see all that information. We see the message body, test, perfect. Okay, so that is how you create an item, and the form should be reset. So we'll just do 1, hit send, and it clears. Okay, so let's just go ahead and make sure that we actually add this to this array. So what we want to do is update the messages array with that new item. So this is just going to give us back an object, so that response. So let's go ahead and just do set messages. So we want to update the messages array. So that's a problem with setting state that's too similar to something else. Always throws me off here. So we have this array. We're going to pass in the new response object. Actually, you know what I want to do? I think it's much safer to do things this way, where we have the previous state. So we want to set that. So give me 1 second. So we'll just do prev state. And I believe we can just do the arrow function. And then we can pass in the new values. That's going to be the response. And then spread out the original array. I believe that's how you do it. Let's see, messages. Okay, so let's test this out. We'll just say 1, send, 2, send. Perfect. Okay, so it's working. Now, I want to show you one thing here, and I want to be able to show you how to sort this response here. So right now, we're just adding this response to the beginning of the array, which is why it works. But we're sorting in ascending order. So what that means is if I refresh this, the oldest item will always be at the top. So what I want to do is invert this to where the newest item is always going to be at the top. So right now, it's only working because we're manually adding it with this value right here. But what about users on the other end? So we just always want to make sure to sort that. And at this point, this is a perfect opportunity for me to be able to show you how this query object works. So we're just going to import query. And in our documentation, I guess I'm taking ownership with Appwrite, but in the Appwrite documentation, inside of list, let's see, we have list documents. The third parameter is going to be all the queries that we can add, and this has to be an array. And we're going to use this query class to actually throw those in. So what we're going to do is, as the third parameter, we're going to pass in an array, and we're going to use that query class that we just added in, and we're going to go ahead and say query dot, and I believe we can do by descending order descending, and we can specify the attribute that we want to order it by, and I want us to order this by created at. I believe that should work. So if I save this, now if I refresh it, I guess that didn't work. Give me 1 second to figure out why that didn't work. So query.order descend created at. Let's see, am I getting an error? Let's just check this out. Okay, so invalid permissions, order is not allowed. Oh, okay, so I just realized something. I believe that next, okay, so we're creating, okay, I added this to the wrong area. My apologies. Okay, so that is supposed to be the permissions array that we add to create document. I need to go down to list. So sorry about hitting the mic there. That might be loud. Let's go ahead and fix this indentation, and we'll throw this in as the next parameter here. So that should do it. So this is in list documents, not create documents. Okay, so there we go. As we add new items, let's just do 3. That gets added, and now if I refresh it, it stays that way. So if I want to change it, I can do order ascending, and I believe that's going to be, how do you do ascend? You know what? I'm not even going to try that. You get the idea. We can reorder that. We can also limit queries. So right now, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 messages. What I could do is I can always just go ahead and add in another value here. We can do query. So we're not going to talk about pagination, but what we could do, what I'll do is just show you this limit right here. So we'll set this up, and I might cover that in another video. I can just set this to 2. So the limit will be 2. That means we get 2 messages on every response. I can set this to 5. We'll get 5, and let's just set it to 20. Let's say we want to see 20 messages on each query. So that's how we can take care of the limiting and ordering our responses. So the next thing I want to do is add in the ability to actually delete a message. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create a method called delete message. And if we go into our documentation, in the databases API, there's going to be a section for deleting a document. So let me just zoom in here. Let's see if it messed up my scroll position. Delete a document. So in order to delete a document, we have to pass in the database ID, the collection ID, and then the document that we want to delete. and that's it. So the request would look something like this, where we just call databases.delete document and pass in these parameters. So let's just go ahead and take this part right here. I don't need that response. Unless I'm trying to air handle later on, that would probably be a good idea. But for now, we're just trying to get rid of that message. And let's just go ahead and bring in a new method called delete message. We'll create, so we'll just do delete message. And we'll just make this an async function. Message underscore ID, create that arrow function. And we're just going to call databases.delete document, and we'll pass in the database ID, the collection ID, and the document ID. So the document ID is going to be the message that we clicked on. And the way we're going to pass this in is going to be through here. So on each iteration, and I just realized we have messages.map messages. That should be message, and I don't even know how that worked. Technically, I think that's supposed to throw an error, so it looks like it's been working up until this point, so it should be message like that. So let me just make sure that didn't change anything or throw any errors. Okay, still looks like it's working. Cool. So what we're going to do here is inside of the header, I'm first going to add a button. We're going to test it, make sure it works, and then I'm just going to throw in an icon for some styling. We're going to use React Feather. We're going to bring in like a trash icon so people know instinctively to click on that to delete the message. So let's go ahead and create this button. Let's just throw in an X for now, and we're just going to do on click, and we'll just throw in the function. And to be able to pass in a parameter, we're going to go ahead and wrap this in a function, and then call delete messages, and we can get the message dot ID like that. So when we click on it, we're going to go ahead and delete the message by passing that in. This is going to call the delete message function. And in here, what I want to do is I just want to go ahead and update the messages array. So I want to be able to move it or remove it from messages here. So we're just going to go ahead and get the messages. Let's see, how do I want to do this? I think I can just do previous state. And then we're going to do messages dot filter. And we're going to filter out this message by getting the message, pass in the function here, and then we'll just do message dot ID. So when the message ID matches or is not equal to the message ID like that. So we should be able to filter out all message, or filter out the message that we just clicked on. So let's see, message. Here, let's just test this out. Let's try it. So if I click on this, there we go. So it's filtering it out. So we're going through the messages, and we're going to create a new array here and reset it. And we're just going to go ahead and filter out the messages that are not this message ID. So I confuse myself with that filter process. I always get filter and map and reduce mixed up here. So we filter that message out, and it looks like it works successfully. No issues in the console. So we can actually go ahead and just remove test here. So this is the message. We'll click delete. We'll delete that duplicate, and there we go. So that's all working. Awesome. So let's go ahead and bring in that icon. So we want to make sure this looks a little bit nicer. So we'll focus on styling for the next couple of seconds. So we'll just look up React Feather. So React Feather has this package for, or Feather Icons has a package for React, and we're just looking for the trash icon. So we're looking for this one, that's trash 2. And what we're going to do is just go ahead and run an install for React Feather. So we need to install the library or the package, npm install react-feather. We'll bring this in. Let's go ahead and start up our server again. And we can bring in import trash2 from react-feather. So we'll bring that in. Let's go back here. Let's see, we have the header. Oh, that's the form. Okay, here we go. So all we need to do is just modify this. So let's just go ahead and bring in that icon from scratch. So we'll just do trash2. And then we'll just add in this event listener into this icon. And then we're going to give it some styling. So if we go back here, let's close out React Feather. Here we see this trash icon, and I just want to make sure it's styled now. So we can just add in the class right here. Let's go ahead and just move this down, and we'll just do class name. And the CSS I gave this one was delete _btn. So there we go. So on hover, it turns red, and that looks a lot better. Now, really quick for the timestamp, let's just do this right now while we're here. So this should be pretty simple. You can change up the styling if you need, but for now, we're just going to do new date. We're just going to wrap this, and we're just going to give it a date and a time stamp. So we can just go ahead and do that, and then dot to local string. Now, the reason why I don't like this is because it makes it look a little bit better, but we get the milliseconds here, and I don't like that, but that's not what I want to focus on. It's going to bug me a little bit that it's there, but I'll leave that part up to you. If you want to format that and make it look nicer, you can take care of that. So what we want to focus on next is going to be that real-time functionality. So we want to make sure users get messages in real time. So we want to be able to subscribe to different events and then have that data transmitted. So let's go ahead and look at the documentation, and we'll just get a start there, and we'll start building this in. And this is definitely one of the things I was most excited about when I started using Appwrite, is how easy it made this, because I've worked with WebSockets before, and it's no walk in the park to do that. So this is really, really exciting. So if we look at this, Appwrite lets us subscribe to a series of what it calls channels. So these are different channels. For example, if we look at this example, we're subscribing to the file system. So anytime an event happens inside of our storage buckets, let's say a new file is created or updated or removed from our buckets, we can subscribe to this event and we can get that feedback in real time. So it's listening to that event. We can subscribe to database events. We can subscribe to user account events. So let's say a new user logged in or created an account. These are all different events we can subscribe to. So if we look here, we have an account. So when something happens with the accounts, we subscribe to, in this case, it looks like all of the events. So I'm assuming create, read, update, well, not read, but create, update, and delete. If we go down here, this is an event that looks like it's subscribing to a specific document in the database. I'm assuming A right here is that document ID, because that's a placeholder right here for the collection ID. So we can actually subscribe to a series of events. So right now we're subscribing to a document in a collection and the file system. And then there's also the ability to unsubscribe to events. We'll talk about this in a second once we run into the error. I always prefer to create the bug and then fix it. So let's go ahead and just copy this code, and we're going to modify this. So we're going to bring this into our application, and the area where we want to subscribe to this event is going to be inside of the use effect hook. So let's see right here. So we only want to subscribe to the event when we first load the page and when we go to the room specifically. Other than that, I don't care for message events. I don't need to see messages if I'm not specifically in this room. So I only want to subscribe to one event, so we'll remove this array, and we can remove that. And what I'm going to do is change this to backticks here. And then at this point, what I can do is go ahead and just change this to the collection ID. So we want to listen to the messages collection, and we want to listen to events from all the documents in there. Now, if we look at the documentation, let's just see how this works. So we have the unsubscribe event. If we look here, this is where I read about the different channels. So a list of channels you can subscribe to. So all account related events. Here we go. So any create, update, and delete event to any document in a specific collection. So what we need is databases, the database ID, then we need collections, the collection ID, and then documents. So let's go ahead and modify this. So we're going to do databases, and then at this point we can just do dot, and we'll bring in the database ID. So we'll just go ahead and do database ID, and we're going to listen for all the events. So we have database ID dot collections, and then after this section, what we want to do is add in a dot right there, and then collections, and let's see, collections dot documents, and I think that should be good. Now we also need to import that client object. So inside of Appwrite config, we had the default export as client. So let's go ahead and bring that in. So we can go into the Appwrite config section where we imported everything, and then Appwrite, or the client instance, will be outside here. Let's go ahead and check this out, and let's just test this out. So at this point, I think we should be good to listen for all events with the messages collection. Okay, so let's just go ahead and add in some kind of string here. We'll just say real time right here. Okay, we'll save that and let's just see how this works. So go in here, open up the console, see if we have any errors, refresh it, and let's just say hello. We'll hit send, and here we go. So we see real time right here, and we see that response. So what I want to do is first of all make sure that this is really real time. So I want to make sure that users that are also in this room see this event. So what I'm going to do is create another tab here, and we'll paste this in, and let's just refresh this. So right now we only see the response, and let's pull up the other tab. So when I send a message here, I should see not only in my own console here, which we won't worry about, I want to make sure that the event listener fires off over here for the remote user. So let's just go ahead and say hi, and we'll send it. And look at that. This user sent the message and this user received it. So that means it's properly working. It's all happening in real time. I didn't have to refresh anything. It all worked. So let's go ahead and look at this response here. So I need to actually listen for this event and then take the message that was sent and add it to the DOM, right? So we want to be able to see that message appear in real time for the remote user. Right now, we only listen to the event listener and we only see it in the console. So if I click this, we see the channels. So this tells me about what I'm subscribing to. So I'm subscribing to documents. That's the, I believe, the channel type. Then I'm subscribing to a database, specifically this collection right here, which is the messages collection. I see the ID. So I see all that information about that specific event or that channel that I'm subscribing to. Then I see the payload. So right here, from that remote user, we sent this message. So I see this object, we see the payload, I see the body, it says hello or hi. So I'll be able to get this message, take it, and then append it to the DOM or render it out. Now, what I need to listen for or look for is going to be this events array. So I'm still trying to fully understand the details of what's happening. I'm looking through the documentation, but it looks like this event or events array is telling me a bunch of information about the type of events that fired off and what happened. So specifically right now, we just created a item, right? So somewhere in here, if we look at index number 1, we see databases, .collections. So we're subscribing to collections, documents. I see create here. So I noticed every single time we're creating an event, the create string rate is right here. So if I delete a object here, remember we're subscribing to create, update, and delete methods. If I delete or hi, not hello, if I delete it, we should see this event. Let's see what's going on with my code. Or did I not refresh that? So if I delete hello, here we go. I see that message in real time. And same thing, if I go to this channels or events array, I see databases, collections, documents, delete. So I know it's a delete event. So what I need to do is pay attention to delete or create or even update in the future. And I want to respond differently. So if a user deletes a message, I don't want to append a new message to the DOM because I'm just going to get an error. If I add a message, I don't want to remove a message from the DOM. Remember, this event handler is going to handle all sorts of events. It's listening to all of them. So what I need to do here is I need to add a condition here and go ahead and listen to those events. So let me try to go through this slowly so it all makes sense. If we go to the real-time documentation, here we see the response object for when an event or a document is updated. If we look here, we have all this information. Again, I haven't studied all these details. I just understand based off of examples that I've seen. I need to look for this specific string. So what I want to do is I need to check and say, hey, if I'm looking for an update event, I need to make sure this string exists in this array. If I'm looking for a delete event, I should see this string with the end value being delete. And if it's a create event, this value right here should be create. So that's what I'm looking for. So I'm getting that response and I'm looking for this specific string. So let's try this. So let's go ahead and run through this. So we'll just do if response dot events. So we're going through the events. Remember that we just saw that in the console. We're going through the events dot includes. Let's go ahead and grab this entire string. And there's probably a more efficient way to do this, but I just want to try it out this way. So if the response events array includes databases, collections, documents, and we're looking for create, then we can say an item was created. So we'll just do console.log, or we'll just say a message was created. Then what I also want to do is I want to listen for delete events. So we're just going to remove this real time console here, or this statement. Then we want to look for delete. So we're just going to say delete. So if that's the event type, we'll just say deleted with an exclamation point so we can see it differently. So now this will fire off at any event, but we want to respond differently depending on the event type. So let's try this. Okay, we'll refresh it. And let's go ahead and create an item. So we'll just say hi, or create a message. We see message was created. And if we delete a message, we'll delete hello. We see message was deleted. The only issue right now is that it's firing off twice, but we'll take care of that. So here we go. We're listening to two different events. I keep deleting messages. It's all working perfectly fine. That's exactly how we needed it to happen. And remote users are getting this. Okay, so what I want to do is actually I want to clean this up a little bit. Actually, for now, let's just focus on this. So what I want to do is actually remove the messages when they're added and then add them when they're deleted. So I can just go ahead and go to delete messages, and I'm going to comment this out right here. And I no longer want to delete messages from this method because all users are simply just going to listen to that event. So that means even the sender will also get back that event. So this way we can confirm that it happened. So we're just going to go ahead and do set messages, previous state, message.message ID. So at this point, what we can do is instead of the message ID here, we're just going to do response.payload, and we can get the ID of the message here. So we're going to filter out the message that was deleted. So now this will actually occur to remote users. And we want to do the same for the create message method here. So anytime a message is created on handle submit, before what we would do is would get that response and we would update the messages array or the state. We want to comment this out and copy it. And let's go ahead and bring this up here, and we're going to let this event listener right here respond to it. So anytime we create a new message for all the users, we're going to go ahead and get the previous state, response.previous state. So at this point, we're going to do response.payload. So before we just had the response, now we need to access the payload, and make sure you're updating the state this way, by the way. So I know sometimes people update it like this, where you can just do that right there and get messages. This won't work because what's going to happen is when this use effect is called, the array is going to be empty. So anytime this method is going to be called, what's going to happen is you're going to add the new message, but it's the only message you're going to see is actually going to erase your old messages. And that's because of when this subscribe method is called. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. So keep this at this right here. So previous state, response.payload, and get the previous state. This is the more proper way to update this right here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just refresh everything. Let's test this out, and we're about to get an error, and this is going to be where we fix a few things. So let's just go ahead and add in hey. We'll hit send, and look at this. So the message was sent twice. So we see hey twice and hey twice here. So the issue occurs with how useEffect is called. So useEffect gets called twice here. So when useEffect subscribes, what happens is the second time it gets called, we subscribe twice to that same event. So what's happening is we have two subscriptions to this channel, and then therefore when that event fires off, both subscriptions are listening and firing off that event. So what we need to do is we need to have a cleanup function that basically gets called anytime useEffect is unmounted or our component is unmounted. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a cleanup function, and we're just going to go ahead and unsubscribe to this event. So anytime or on the first iteration, when useEffect unmounts, we're going to unsubscribe and then resubscribe on that final iteration. So we only have one subscription to this collection. So we have this cleanup function inside of useEffect. And if you look at the documentation, it does actually talk about this, and or at least it shows you how to unsubscribe to an event. And let's just go ahead and find that. So here we go. So it looks like subscribe will actually respond or return a function that lets us unsubscribe. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this value of unsubscribe to the return value of subscribe, and then we can call that function to unsubscribe. So let's try this. So when we subscribe, let's go ahead and do const unsubscribe, and we'll set that. And then on that cleanup function, we're going to go ahead and call that again. So we're going to save that. So this should give us one subscription only to that event. So let's go ahead and try this again. We'll just say one, send, and there we go. Now we get one instance of it. Then we do two, there we go. And if I hit delete, now it's being deleted, and we are updating in real time with no errors. I think we're good. So yeah, that looks like it checks out. So let me look at my notes, and I think the next section is going to be where we are adding in authentication and routing. So let's start taking care of that. Let's go back into here, and the first thing I'm going to do is actually import React Router DOM. We're going to create a login page. So we'll just add in some basic routing, and then we're going to create protected routes, and we'll start dealing with user authentication. So we'll go into pages, and let's start by closing all of this out just to kind of keep things clean. And we'll create a new file called login page. I guess we can call it page. We'll just put that in there, JSX here, and then we'll just do React arrow function component export, and we'll just say login. Okay, so this is our login page for now. We'll keep it simple. For the router, let's go ahead and install React Router DOM. So what I'm going to do is just open up another terminal. We'll just do npm install React Router DOM. Okay, so we're just going to set some basic stuff up here. My leg just fell asleep, so I need to readjust here. Okay, so we have React Router DOM installed, and we want to make some imports. So first of all, we want to import the login page. We'll bring that in, and then we're going to make a few imports from React Router DOM. So we want to import browser router, and we're just going to do as router, and then we're going to do routes and route. So bring all this in from React Router DOM, and we can just wrap all this in our router, and then we'll just do routes. And inside of routes, so we're no longer using the switch statement. That's kind of old news by now. I think that was last time we used that was in React Router 5. So now everything's going to be a part of routes, and we create the actual route here, and we can bring in the component. So we'll set the path. We no longer have to set exact, and we'll just do element. I believe it's element. Before it used to be component, and we'll just do room. So room will be the home page. So we can get rid of this. And we're going to have a path for the login page. So let's go ahead and do this. Login page. And we're going to test this out. We're going to have to protect these routes too. So we'll create a private route here real soon. So let's just make sure the routing is working. If we go back here, refresh it. Login. Here we go. We see the login page. And I don't know why this bar is showing. Let's see. Minimize this. Okay, there we go. And then we have our homepage. So from here, what I want to do is go ahead and create those private routes. So I'm going to create a component that's going to wrap any route that we want to protect. So let's go ahead and create a new folder and file. So we'll make a components folder. And this will be private routes. So it'll be plural, private routes.jsx, and that'll be in the components folder. We'll just use our code snippet, React arrow function component exported. And we want to import outlet from React Router DOM, and we want to import navigate. And we'll just go ahead and do -DOM. I think just having React Router will work just fine, but just to be safe, we'll update that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a component that's going to be, or I guess a parent component that's going to be a parent route to any private route. So we're going to use outlet here. And we're going to check the authentication status of our user. And if we're authenticated, what's going to happen is we're going to use outlet to pass down the routes down to the child routes from this parent component. And if we're not authenticated, we're going to redirect our user to the login page. So I actually wrote an article up about this from using React Router 5, where we used to create this component here. So we basically used to do this right here. We would basically create this private route, pass down the children, and then we would just redirect our user to the login page. If not, we would pass down all the child components. Well, in React Router 6, because of how router and routes work, every single route needs to be a child of the routes component. So we can't do this anymore. I break this down in this article, so I'd highly recommend checking this out. It's in the video description. So essentially, we have to create our component and use outlet now, and we just pass down all the child routes. So we're not passing down a component now, we're passing down child routes. So that's what outlet does for us. So inside of private routes, let's go ahead and create a fake user. We'll actually set this up in a minute, but for now, we're just going to say user is equal to false. And we're going to use a context API to actually lift up our state and hold the user in there. But for now, we're going to pretend that our user is false, meaning we don't have anything there. Typically, this would be something like null, so that also works. And we're going to say, if we have a user, then go ahead and pass in outlet here and let the navigation continue down to the child routes. If not, so if this user is false or this value is not true, let's say we don't have a user object in there, we're just going to go ahead and call navigate, and we're going to redirect the user to the login page. And that pretty much sums up the entire component. So now to use this, and this is just going to help us build out our application to where once we're scaling it up, so we're not having to check every single component. So we're just going to create a route that's going to wrap these. So let's go ahead and bring this in. So we'll just do import private routes. And I actually want to put this import above here because any pages that I'm going to be adding in the future, we want those down here. So I want to keep those in order. So we'll bring in private routes. And now this is the way we wrap our component. So let me just pull up my sample just to kind of confirm things. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a route here, and we're just going to go ahead and pass in the element, and the element is going to be the private route. So we're going to do private routes here, bring that in, close off the component, and that can be closed off like this. If I can actually type here. So we have our route, and that's going to be the private route component. So I can just remove this and fix that. So we have our private route, and what I do with all the children is I actually pass in this route down here. So that's what outlet lets us do. So outlet just continues this. So we check this, we go into the private route component. If everything checks out, the user clears out, we go to outlet, and that passes us down to this next page. And this is where any protected pages would sit in here. Any unprotected pages would be out here. So that's kind of the idea. I hope that makes sense. Maybe if you already understand this and I'm just over explaining, but at least people can understand it and kind of get through this part here. Okay, so we have that. Let's go ahead and check it. So we will go into the login page. Here we go. So at this point, if I try to go to the home page, so let's try to do this. We'll remove that and we'll hit enter, and it takes me back to the login page. Now, if we set user to true, we're still in the login page. So at some point, we're actually going to say, hey, if we're logged in, send the user to the next page or to the home page. So now that the user is true, we can log in. So the private route works. That's exactly what we wanted. So everything's checking out. And let's go ahead and create or use a context API and actually create and lift up our state so we can get a user from there and then pass it down to all the components where we need it. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to create a new folder. Let's see, did I have it structured like this? I think I created a context folder. So I'm going to create a utils folder. So any utility files or components that we have, we're just going to put in there. So we'll create a new file, and this is going to be in a utils file or folder. So new file, utils, and then we'll just do AuthContext.jsx. Okay, so we have our AuthContext, and inside of our AuthContext, we're just going to use the context API to build this context out and then pass everything down. So let's just go ahead and run some imports. So we're just going to import create context, and this is going to be from React. We also want to pass in use state, and at some point we're going to need use effect, and we want to create the context itself. So let's go down to the next line, and let me just close this file out. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and create the auth context. So we'll just do auth context, and we'll just use the create context method. And then we're going to go ahead and create the provider just directly in here. So we're just going to export the auth provider. So const auth provider. And we're going to pass in children in here. And we're going to wrap all of our components with this provider. So we're providing down the data to our child components. Okay, so we have our auth provider, and I also want to export the auth context as default. So I'm exporting the auth provider as a named export. We'll just do export default, and we'll just do auth context. If we ever need to use that anywhere else, we're just going to export it that way. And with this provider, let's go ahead and return the values that we need. So we're just going to return the auth context dot provider, and let's close this out. In here, we need to pass in the values that we want to pass down to the child components. We'll just do value, and this is just going to be an object which we need to set right here. So we're just going to call this context data. So this will be an object that we're going to pass all the data to. So right now it's going to be empty, but we'll pass in context data there. Okay, so from here, we're going to pass in the values that we want to pass down to the child components. We'll just do value, and this is just going to be an object which we need to set right here. So we're just going to call this context data. So this will be an object that we're going to pass all the data to. So right now it's going to be empty, but we'll pass in context data there. Okay, so what we want to do is just set up some state now. So in our auth provider in here, we're just going to use state. We're going to set a user and then set user, and use state will give us the value of null in the beginning. So a user will always start off as null. And we also want to set a loading value. So we want time to actually load in a user in the future. So we'll just do loading, set loading, use state, and the value by default to loading, I think I want this true. So anytime we're loading the page, this is going to be true until we actually update it. So just in case any of the child components rely on anything from our auth provider, we want to make sure that we're first loading and don't render any of the components below. So what we're going to do here, all the child components, we're just going to go ahead and check the loading state. So if we're loading is true at first. We're just going to go ahead and throw in a paragraph tag. Later on, you can put in load spinner, something that lets people know it's loading. For now, I'm just going to do loading like that. Once loading is false, we're just going to go ahead and render out the children. So once loading is done, we just say, hey, go ahead and continue and pass down the data. Okay, so user is null. We have loading, context data. Let's go ahead and actually wrap our app component to pass this data down, and then we're going to go into private routes and get that data from here. So we can go into app here, and inside of app, just underneath our router, I can go ahead and add in our auth provider. So we'll import auth provider, and that's coming from utils, AuthContext, perfect. Let's just go ahead and wrap this right here. So auth provider. And we need to close this out. This is going to be just under routes. Okay, so we have our auth provider. That means all the data should be available in the child components. And we're going to create a custom hook so we can access this data in a cleaner way here. So we'll create that custom hook, and this is going to be easy to do. Usually I'll create like a whole hooks folder and keep the hooks in their own area. If this project ever did scale up, I would do that, but for now, let's just go ahead and export const, and we're going to create a hook called use auth. So this is going to allow us to hook into the state of this context provider and use the context data here without having to use the use context hook. It's just like an extra import if we do that. So we're just going to create the use auth hook, which is going to keep things a little bit cleaner. So we'll create the function, and let's just go ahead and return use context, and we're going to use the auth context. So typically you'd have to import this use context hook inside of every child component, but once we have use auth, it's just going to make things a lot cleaner. So now we can access all this data right here that we're about to pass in. So we'll just do user. So that's the first thing we want to pass in. We don't need to pass in loading. So we're going to pass in user. That's going to get passed down to the children, and then we're going to use this hook to get this user. So inside of private routes, we're just going to go ahead and do this, and we're going to call use auth, and it should, not user, use auth like that. It should go ahead and automatically import use auth, and there we go. We can just destructure this object here. We'll get back the user, and now the user is going to be either true or false, or null or an object from the auth provider. So we're no longer having to manually set that value in here. So let's just test this out here. We see loading. Oh, I guess I probably should update this. So inside of use effect, at this point, what I'm going to do is actually go back into use effect, or into my private routes in my auth context, and we're just going to set up that use effect here. And essentially what we're going to want to do later is actually get that user data on first load, and we're going to update loading once we get that data. But for now, let's just go ahead and set loading to false. So let's just imagine we got that data and we just update loading from here, and there we go. So now we should be able to see the children, or the child components. Let's see auth provider, what's going on here? Above error, private routes. I did start typing something, and it must have messed with this component. Use auth, user, auth provider. Oh, this is supposed to be auth context. There we go. Okay, so we're in that login page. If I try to go to the home page, it won't work. And now if I just update the user inside of my auth context, we can set that to true. And now that should work. We should be able to go to the home page. Okay, so really quick, what I'm gonna do is just go to our login page, and we're just gonna make sure that a user can't be in the login page unless they're not authenticated. So we wanna redirect them from this page to the home page. So we'll just do use effect, and we're just gonna check something. So now we can just use that auth provider. So we'll just do user, and we can use this in multiple areas. We'll just do use auth. We'll bring in that user object, and inside of use effect, let's see, we want to set an empty dependency array here. So only on the first load, we're just going to ask a quick question. We're going to say if user, getting ahead of myself, if user, then redirect our user. So if user, then let's just go ahead and import navigate. Oh, use navigate. It's a hook from React Router DOM. So use navigate. And in order to use this, we just need to go ahead and set this up. So we'll just do const navigate is equal to use navigate. And then we just want to redirect our user back to the home page. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just minimize this, and then we'll bring this to the right side. So at this point, we can go back to our auth context just to kind of demo this out. Let's go to, we can close out private routes. We can close out app.js for now. And let's see. So if we set this to null or false, it'll redirect us back to the login page. If we set it to true, it'll redirect us back to the home page. Okay, so that's perfect. That's what we wanted. So what we have to do next now is build in the login form. So we're going to build out the form, and then we're actually going to start dealing with the methods that Appwrite gives us. We're going to use their SDK to start actually logging our user in. So let's build this out here. So for our login form, there's just going to be a little bit of prep work to do here. So go to login page. Let's just start building this out here. So for the form itself, we're gonna create a div, and I'm gonna start adding in some of the classes right now just to build this out as we go so we're not having to come back. We'll just call this auth -- container. Okay, so we have our auth container in here. We're gonna go ahead and create a wrapper for our form. So this will be a class name of form -- wrapper, and then we're gonna build in the form itself. So let's create the form. Okay, so inside of the form, every single field will be wrapped in a div here, and that div is gonna have the class name of field -- wrapper. Okay, so in here, let's just throw in a label tag. And this is going to be our email. So we're going to do email and password for login. So we have the email, and then for the input field of type is going to be email. And let's just go ahead and indent this right here so we can start working with that. So we have the email, or the type of email. This is going to be required. For the placeholder, or for the name, we want to call this email. So for the actual field name, then we want to have a placeholder that says enter your email. Enter your email, ... And we also want to set the value here, and then the onChange event. So there's a few different ways we can do this. We can use ref to actually submit the form and pull the values out of this input field. What I'm going to do is just still set the state inside of the login page. So we're going to set our state, and this is going to be called credentials here. And we're just going to have an object with an email and a password, and then we're going to have a dynamic way of actually updating it. So I don't know if maybe you've seen this method or not, but if you haven't, you just get to learn a new way. If you want to use your way, that's totally fine. But I actually like using this method of setting up the credentials here. So we'll just do credentials. Okay, so credentials and then set credentials. And then in here, inside of the state itself, we're just gonna go ahead and pass in email, and that'll be an empty string, and password. And that'll also be an empty string. So that means for the value, we're gonna access credentials, and we just need to get these values from here. So we're just gonna do value, and that's gonna be equal to credentials. And if this value doesn't exist for some reason, we could just go ahead and pass in, actually, I guess we can just access it directly. We already know it's there, so we'll just do credentials.email like that. So we have the email, and we also need to pass in the on change value. So on change, what do we want to do here? Well, we're going to have a handle input change method. And this is how we can make this dynamic. So inside of handle change, this is where the magic is going to happen. So we're just going to call this handle input change. And in here, what we need to do is, first of all, we need to grab the event itself. So we're going to grab the event, and we're going to set the name and the value of the current field that we're working on. So name and value. Okay, so for the name, we're just going to do e.target.name. And for the value, e.target.value. And then when we update our state, we can use this same field for both, or the same function or handle function for both fields that we're going to add for, our email and our password field. So at this point, then all we need to do is just do set credentials, and we're going to pass in an object with a spread operator, taking the original credentials that we have, and then we're going to go ahead and just pass in the name, and make sure that you wrap that in square brackets, and we're going to pass this value in. So the reason for this, I don't want to get into this right now, but because we're using the name value like this, and because it's a dynamic value, you can't just do name like that. This will not work. It'll actually, I believe, just take the hard-coded string value of name. If you pass this in, you tell it it's a dynamic value. So that means as we start changing the input field, if the input field value is email, this will be email. If it's password, then this will be password. So let's just console this out and see what happens. So let's do console.log, and let's just throw in credentials. Okay, so handle input change. Let's actually just grab the second field now. And this will be the type of password and the name of password. And then enter password. Enter password, credentials dot password. On change, handle input change. That looks good. And let's just go ahead and go into our browser. What I'm going to do is just type in some information here. We'll just do dennis@email.com just to make sure that it doesn't accidentally autofill one of my passwords. So we'll just do some random characters. And if I go ahead and inspect this, we see this object, and as we're typing here, we should be able to see the password and email get updated. So it knows exactly which one to update. If we start updating the email, it updates the email. If we update the password, it updates the password field. Okay, so that looks good. Everything's working. Let's go ahead and continue here. So at this point, I actually need to change this to class name. Saw the error in the console earlier. So we want to fix that. And now we actually want to handle the login. So what happens when we submit this? So we're going to need to create a function that actually handles the login method. Now for this, what we're going to do is we're actually going to process this from the AuthContext. So we're going to create that function from there. We're going to pass it down, and then we will make sure that it gets triggered when this function gets submitted. So I actually really quickly just need to complete this login form. So we want to create another wrapper. Completely forgot about this. We'll just set an input type. This value will be of submit. So when this form is submitted, we'll just go ahead and let's see, the type is supposed to be submit, and then the value. Okay, 1 second. So value is supposed to be login. So we'll close that out, and let's give this a class name of, I believe we just called it, it's a button, so it's going to be the main button. So class name, and this is going to be BTN, and then BTN --LG, so a large button, and BTN --main. Okay, so there we go. That looks a little bit better. And let's go to our AuthContext. So we're going to create the handle user login function just underneath our use effect here. So we're going to do const handle user login. And inside of this auth context is where we're going to store all of the login, logout, and register user functionality. So we just want to keep that up inside of this context here. That's really up to you and how you do this. But I like the idea of keeping it here because that information will be stored in sort of like the global scope of things, or in the global state. So we just want to keep it up here and then just pass down any function we need into like the logout button or that register form. So we're just going to pass in the original event. We'll pass in the credentials. So we'll just do credentials, pass that in here. And then with this form, we'll just do e.event default, and we'll stop the original form submission. And at this point, we're about to go into the Appwrite documentation. But at this point, let's just go ahead and write the try catch. So what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to log the user in, get the user information, and then we'll just do an accept block here, or catch, not accept. Accept is Python. So I work with both. And we're just going to console the error out. So console.error, and let's just pass that out here. So, okay, so in here is where we're going to log in the user. So we're going to submit it, pass in the event and the credentials. Now, what I need to do is just go ahead and go down to the context data, pass in the function, which will be passed down to all the child components. So anywhere I need it, it'll be available through context data, which now means I can go to the login page and I can just use the use auth hook and bring in handle user login. There we go. And then when we submit this form, we're just going to do on submit. We're just going to go ahead and create a function and wrap this in it. We're going to take the original event and pass that through to handle user login, which will take in the event and the credentials. Okay, so we're calling handle user login with the event and credentials. You can just go ahead and get rid of that. Then we pass that up to the auth context, which is going to go ahead and take that information and try to log our user in. So let's add in this logic. So if we go to the documentation, let's zoom out again, make sure this is formatted. Let's go into the account settings here. So we'll go into account, and with the web SDK from the client side, in order to log in a user, we have a few methods here. We can create an account, create an email session. This is what we want to focus on right now. So I'm try to zoom in here. We'll do create an email session. We'll find that part, and let's just look through the code here. And my mouse just died, so let me pause this and I'll restart in a minute. Okay, so I'm back. It looks like just the Bluetooth got disconnected. But yeah, we are in the client section in the web SDK. And let's just scroll through here. So we have create an email session. Let's go down to this part. So we have that through the REST API. We're not going to use that. We just need to send a request with the email and password to create this email session. Okay, so if we look through the code here, let me zoom in a little bit more. We have this create an email session function where we pass in the email and password. And this comes from the account object, which we need to create. And this is going to be from the account class. So let's just copy this right here. And let's just go back into our Appwrite config section. And we'll just pass in account, and we'll bring this in next to databases, and let's just do a default export. So it takes in that client object just like we did with databases. We call new account, create a new instance, and we'll just export it. Okay, so that means that we can just go into our auth context, and first of all, let's just import the account. So import account from Appwrite config. Then we go down to this handle user login. Inside of the try statement, what we're going to do is just go ahead and copy this right here. So account dot create email session, and we'll just do response. And then this will be a wait, and let's just see what we get back for the response. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pass in the user email, and we haven't created a user, so we're about to do this in a second. We'll do credentials.email, credentials.password. Okay, so we pass that in, and let's just first of all see what kind of response we get. Let's just try it without a user. So let's just go ahead and inspect console. Let's just try to log a user in. So it looks like we have invalid credentials. That's exactly what we needed. Perfect. So now we can go to auth. So in here, let's see, I'm in the wrong app, so I need to go back to tutorial. That was the demo app. So in here, and it looks like it's starting to read the request, so that's perfect. We'll go into authentication and let's create a user. So we'll just create a user called Dennis Ivy. Email will be dennis@dennisivy.com. And we don't need a phone number, but we'll just pass in some kind of password. We'll just do password 123. Let's just see if that works. Okay, looks like it worked. Perfect. It's telling me to change my password. Well, we'll leave it be for now. Okay, so let's try to log in. We'll just do dennis@dennisivy.com. Password 123. We'll hit login. And let me just zoom out a little bit. Appwrite is using local storage. Okay, that's all good. Looks like I am logged in. So we forgot to console out the response. Let's just do console.log. And we'll just do logged double G. There we go. Logged in. And let's just get the response. Okay. Yikes, I accidentally hit save. Okay, Google, stop yelling at me. Never, don't save it. Okay. I guess I probably should have used my other email because now I probably do need to save it because it's going to keep asking me to auto or manually type it in. DennisIV.com. Let me just copy this and then password 123. We'll hit submit. All right, there we go. So here is logged in. We see our user. So we see some basic information about our session. So it doesn't exactly give us back the user. It just gives us back all this session information. So it tells us our location, it gives us all this information. Hopefully nobody tries to get this information and kill me later. But yeah, this is all the information for the session, but we also want to get our user information. So what I want to do is right after we log in, if everything checks out, let's go ahead and get the user. And I'm gonna have to zoom out because I can't see anything when I'm this zoomed in. Let's go ahead and get the account information. So to get the account information, we're just gonna call account.get, I believe was the method. So list sessions. Here, let's just find, did I just click on it? Get account. Okay, here we go. So here's the code. We're just gonna call account.get. So if you can't see that, if it's too zoomed out, I'll just paste it in here and you'll see it in a second. So right after we get the response, if everything checked out well, we're just gonna go ahead and call account.get. So that means we have a session now. We can actually call this method. If we weren't logged in, we wouldn't be able to just call this method like this. So we'll just say, we'll just call this account details. And what I wanna do is I just wanna go ahead and set the user information. So we're gonna set user to account details. And once the user is set, this information should be updated. So once we log in, we just want to go ahead and redirect our user. So let's just import navigate from React Router DOM, navigate like that, from React Router DOM. And I just realized this is supposed to be a named export. That's why I didn't auto fill that in for me. Oh, use navigate. Okay, use navigate. Navigate. This is what happens when I have to try to talk and type and do this late at night. So let's bring this in. We'll just do const navigate, and we're going to use the use navigate hook. And now we can just redirect our user. So we'll just do navigate, and we'll send the user to the home page once the account details are set. Okay, so let's test this out. I actually want to get this user information from the header bar in a second, which we're about to create. So let's just go ahead and hit OK. We'll hit enter. Check the email and password. Oh, that's right, because I'm using dennis@dennisivy.com. I really regret using this email now because it's going to manually make me type it in. Password 123. Let's go see how fast we can do this. Look at that, we're in. So the reason why we're in this page is because we actually have a user session. So remember, this is a protected route. So we logged in and we redirected our user, and the only reason why we're there is because this user object now is not null, but it's full of a user session. So we set those account details, which is gonna be that entire user object, and we set those inside of that user session. So there's still a few things that we wanna take care of. So what I wanna do is, First of all, I want to get this user information inside of my navigation bar, and I'm going to do that after I persist the user in. I was actually going to reverse these steps, but now that I realize I have to keep typing in this password, I want to make sure we persist a user. So what I mean by that is if I refresh this, user is no longer here. So the user is still in the session is still available. In fact, the session right now, if we go into authentication, we can see that the sessions should last 365 days, I believe. And we can change this. So I mentioned this earlier when we were doing the intro. So our session is still available. In fact, we can even go and see user sessions in here somewhere. I promise you it's somewhere there. Okay, so we have the user session, but the problem is we need to get this account. So when we reload, user is not true, and we don't call this handle login function. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a function that gets the current user on load. Okay, so let's go ahead and underneath handle user login, or actually just above it, let's just go ahead and do const. We'll just do get user on load. We'll make this an async function. So we'll get the user on load, and in this function, we're just going to go ahead and call another try catch. And in this error, we're just going to do console.error, and we'll console out the error itself. And normally, I would love to just make a request through here, but apparently I can't do that, where I would just be able to write a function here. Forgetting the name, I'm kind of spacing out, but yeah, you can basically load that in, but I can't do that in this case, so we're just going to go ahead and call this on the useEffect hook here. So we're just going to go ahead and make this request. So we're going to call this exact method, so we can just get account details. We can bring this in here, and we're just going to go ahead and set the user account information. We'll set that user account information, and then we're just going to go ahead and set loading to false. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're going to call this function inside of useEffect, and we no longer need to set loading from here, because this function on load will go ahead and check if we have a user. If we do, it's going to go ahead and update that user account information, and then go ahead and set loading to false. So now this should actually persist our user inside of here. So let's go ahead and try to log in. Well, actually, we're in here because we got the user, because we technically still have a session. So if I refresh it, look at that, we're still in here. That's exactly what we wanted. That's perfect. So what I'm going to do is actually get the user information. We're going to create a header here. I want to list out like a welcome message that says hello and then the user's name. And then we'll add in the logout button. We'll throw in the register functionality, and we're going to start finishing this up here. So we're going to just close this out really soon. So for this, let's go ahead and create a header. And this is going to be just inside of components here. So we'll go ahead and create a new function. This will be header.jsx, React arrow function component exported. We're going to generate that header. And in here, let's go ahead and let's see, we'll give this an ID of, what did I call this? Header -- wrapper. So that's the CSS class, or the CSS that I gave it. So that's the ID name. Make sure it's an ID, not class, because we've been using a lot of classes. And we're just going to say, at this point, normally you'd want a header in every page, but we only have it when a user is authenticated, because we only have a login page and then a register page, which won't have this header. But for now, let's just go ahead and do this. We'll just say if we have a user, then let's go ahead and render the username. So we're just going to go ahead and do this. We'll use a fragment here, and we'll get the user in a second. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to pass in a welcome message. So we'll just do welcome and then the user name. So we'll just do user.name. We'll pass in the username, and then in the else statement, we're just going to go ahead and I guess in theory you just link to a login page. We'll just throw in a button, and we'll just say login for now. Even though you won't see this, but I did want to throw in that else condition to kind of give you an idea. So typically that would just be like a React router link right there. You just send the user to the login page. Okay, so we have our welcome message, and then what I'm going to do is just go ahead and pass in, let's see, I just realized I'm using React Feather, so I can just go ahead and import the login icon here. So we'll bring login. We'll want to just go ahead and bring that in like that. Or actually, sorry, that's going to be log out, not log in. Log out. We'll just have the logout button, and we're just going to add an event handler to this. At this point, we'll just go ahead and do class. Give this a class of header -- link. We'll bring that in right there, and let's just go ahead and get the user. So we'll just do const user, and this is going to be use auth, and we're going to get this from our AuthContext. So I think that's it for the header itself. And we're going to add in an onClick function that logs out our user. That will be from the AuthContext. So what I can do now is I can go to the room itself, and let's just bring in this header. So the header is going to sit, let's see, we'll actually just make a quick import. Okay, we got the header, and that's going to be down here inside of room container, just above the form. Okay, let's see. Should have a header here. I think I put this inside of the form. Is that where? No, room container. Let's see. This is kind of weird. Oh, should be inside of container then. There we are. Okay, perfect. So that's the styling. We see welcome and then the logout button. For some reason, the name is not being output. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and check this. Let's see. On load, what's happening to our account details? Why are we not getting this user? Console.log, account details. Let's check this out. So let's see. I want to see what that user object looks like. Okay, so first of all, we have an error. We have a class instead of a class name. This is inside of what page? I'm assuming our header. Is that what we did? Class name. Let's just get the small errors out. We have a promise. Okay, I see what's happening. Okay, so we're setting a promise inside of this user session. So we'll just do await. If we save that, that should actually give us back an object. Here we go. So we see account details, and here we see all the information. Perfect. And then we see welcome Dennis Ivy. So let's bring in logout. We'll create a new user. We'll test this with another user, and we'll go from there. And then we'll just throw in registration. In fact, let's throw in registration, or let's test a second user once we add in register. So logout is going to be easy. I'm not even going to refer to the documentation at this point. I'll just go through the source code because this is going to be very simple. So we have handle user login. We have get user on load. This is all inside of AuthContext. Let's just do const handle user logout. Actually, don't think we need to make this an async function, but it is what it is at this point. So on logout, let's see, what do we want to do? So at this point, we'll just do account, and we'll just set delete session. And we're going to delete the current session. So we should pass in a string right here, and we'll set user to null. I guess we could throw in await just to make sure that this works before we set null here. And then we can just pass in this method down through the context data. And then inside of the header, we can just go ahead and grab handle. Actually, we'll just paste that in because I copied it. Handle user logout. And then on click, we'll just log out the user. So let's try this. Okay, so we log out. I refresh it. I can't go to the home page. Then we just go ahead and do Dennis at DennisIvy.com. Password 123, the most secure password out there. We log in, and all right, let's debug. What happened? Okay, Appwrite user role guest missing the account scope. Okay, user role guest missing. I have not seen that error. Give me a second. Let me come back. We'll solve this, and I'll talk about what just happened here. Okay, so I figured out a few things here. So first of all, this error is nothing to worry about. I just realized once I looked over here, this is an error that we're consoling out. So what's happening is on load. when we call get user on load, if we are not authenticated, this method will still run. So what's happening is we console out the error, line 25 in AuthContext, like it says right here. I should have read that. So it's just this error saying, hey, we couldn't get the account. So that's nothing to worry about. The second one, the reason why the name wasn't showing up when we log in, and I guess I already added in await. Well, we didn't have await here. So if you don't have this, make sure to add this and make sure we have await right here. So put that there. And then I just updated it. I gave myself a new email. So we're just going to use this one that autofills here. And now when I log in, so it's that same error, I can now log in and I should see Dennis Ivy, account number 2, log out, log back in, and we are good to go. So again, the account name wasn't shown in this header because we were, here, let me just slow down. It wasn't shown here because what happened is login was returning a promise and not the actual account information. Same error that we had with get user on load. We need to call await before account, and that will take care of it. Okay, so where were we? Now that we have that resolved, so we're able to log in and log out. All that's taken care of. I just want to make sure that we're all set here. And let's continue on to the next section. So at this point, we can log out a user. What I want to do is go ahead and actually register a user. So we have that login user method. We have log out. We put the user in the header. So let's go ahead and create a register page. So we just want to register a user from the front end. So let's go ahead and do this. We'll go into pages and we're just going to create another page for registering. So we'll just do register page. I know that you could just do like a component for login and register and then change that component. Figured we'll just do a page. This will be pretty simple to do. Okay, so we'll just use this method here. And what I want to do here is, first of all, we'll bring this into the app.jsx component here. And we're just going to go ahead and create a path for register. So we want to bring in that component. So let's just go ahead and import register page. And we'll bring in the actual route. Okay, so this will be register. And we'll change this to register page. So inside of our login page, so we don't need our header anymore. We just added in that login functionality or log out functionality. We shouldn't need the Appwrite config anymore. The room page, we'll get back to that a little bit later. AuthContext, we will need this. So inside of login page, what I want to do is I want to ask a question at the bottom of this form. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy, actually. I'm going to copy something real quick. We're just going to go ahead and underneath the form, we're just going to ask this question. So we're going to say, don't have an account yet, register, and then we're going to link to the register page. So that's it. That's underneath the form, but still inside of this form wrapper div. And then we also need to import the link. So we'll just do link right here. And let's just check this out. So if I log out, we can just go ahead and click register. And this is our register page. So let's just double check. Let's go into register. And there we go. Okay, so we're in this page. So let's start building this page out. Some of the functionality is going to be pretty similar to the login page. I'll just copy and paste where I need, and then anywhere where we need to add in something new, we'll just go ahead and bring that in. Okay, so inside of the register page, we're going to bring in our state. So we're also going to throw in our credentials. So we'll go ahead and just take this credentials state right here. We'll move this over so they're side by side. We'll bring this in. We'll bring in use state here. And we want a password 1 and a password 2. So we want to give people the ability to confirm their password. So throw in your password and then throw in the confirmation just to make sure that you created an account with the right password. Okay, so we have the credentials. We want to go ahead and use the handle register method that we're about to create. So let's just minimize the handle user login, handle user logout. We'll just do const handle user register, create the function, make it an async function, and we need to assign that. Okay, so we have the function. For now, we'll just leave that blank. And let's just go ahead and throw this in right here. So handle user register. Inside of the register page, we can just go ahead and get the method here. So we'll just do const handle user register, and that's going to be from use auth. So from the use auth hook, I was supposed to import that, but let's just go ahead and import that. Manually import use auth, bring that in from AuthContext. Okay, so we have the handle user register function. From here, we just want to go ahead and handle all the input changes. So we'll go into the login page and we can just grab this right here and copy this directly. So the reason why this is cool is because we can actually make this dynamic. So it doesn't matter what credentials we have. We just get the name, which is going to be email or password 1 or password 2, and then we just modify the credentials. So that's why it's cool. We can reuse that. Let's go ahead and just take in this entire login form. Let's just copy all of this, and we're just going to add in a field here and change up a few things. So we'll copy this, bring this into handle user register, paste that in, and let's see. So we have our email. Enter your email. We update the email itself. On submit, we're going to do handle user register. And let's see, what do we want to send with it? We'll also pass in the event and credentials. Now we have our field wrapper of email. And I just realized in our login page, we were supposed to update a label. So let's see, right here, this is supposed to be password. This is in the login page. So in here, we have an email and then password, and then we're just gonna change the name here to password 1, and this will be password 1, and then we want to go ahead and just duplicate this, and this should be password 2. So for the label, we'll just say confirm, so confirm password, but the name will be password 2, and the type will still be of password. So we'll just say confirm your password. And this will be password 2. We handle the input change, we submit it, everything should be pretty good at this point. And what we're gonna do is just say already have an account, and we're gonna tell people to log in. So instead of don't already have an account, we'll just say already have an account, and they can go to the login page from here. Okay, so let's just see the page. Looks like we have some errors. Let's just see what's going on. Probably one of the imports. Okay, account missing AuthContext. Okay, that's the... Let's just try to refresh this. Okay, go back to login. So I hit login. Okay, what is happening here? Register component. Okay, the above error occurred in the register component. AuthContext, that's not in the register component. Router. Okay, oh, am I missing the link? That might be it. So I might be missing the link from React Router DOM. That wasn't too helpful. Maybe the error was in there, but I just didn't notice it. So we'll just import a link from React Router DOM. We don't have to throw in 6 there. That should work. Okay, so here is the login page. Again, the error's coming from that check, and I can probably just change that to like a warning. So let's just do that so it's not in our way here. Let's just do console.warning on load, because that's annoying to see. It's throwing me off here. I think I can just update it like that. Oh wow, this is a was warning not a console.info maybe? I thought warning was an option. Okay, well, it'll be just info for now. Okay, so here we go. We have our login page. If I start typing stuff in, well, I guess I'm not consoling that out, but we have password 1, password 2, and then we can go back to the login page or the register page. Okay, so on submit, what's going to happen here is we're just going to go ahead and pass in our credentials, which are going to be email, password 1, password 2. That's going to call this right here. That's good. Now inside of AuthContext, let's go ahead and build out this function. So we want to go ahead and take in the event. We want to take in credentials, and we will just go ahead and prevent the default. So e.prevent default. And let's see, what do we want to do in here? So inside of this function, the first thing I want to do is just go ahead and check if the 2 passwords match. So we're just going to go ahead and check password 1 and 2. So if password credentials.password1, so credentials.password1 is not equal to credentials.password2. Well, if this isn't the case, we need to throw an error and we just need to alert the user. So we'll just keep it simple. We'll just use an alert method and we'll just say passwords do not match. Why can't I type? Okay, passwords do not match. Okay, we're gonna yell at the user and we're just gonna return it. So we're not gonna redirect them anywhere. We just want them to see that alert. So let's just try this. I think this should work at this point. So we're gonna go ahead and register Dennis at, let's just say email.com. That's not an email. We'll just do this for password 1 and then let's do this one a little bit longer. There we go, passwords do not match, and we're back here. That's exactly what we wanted. So if the passwords do match, let's just go ahead and run a try catch. So we're gonna need to create a user. We'll do try catch error, and we will throw the error. So just do console.error, and we'll just do error. And then in here, what we want to do is go ahead and create the account. So we're just going to go ahead and set up response, and we'll call await. So it's an async method. And to create an account, what we want to do is just call account.create. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. Now we also need that ID method. So remember, when we're creating messages, we had to actually generate an ID for that specific user. So we're going to import the ID class here. So we're just going to do ID import ID from Appwrite, like that. And we're just gonna first of all call ID.unique. So we're gonna throw in those credentials. So that's the first part. We'll do ID.unique. It's gonna generate a user ID. The second parameter is gonna be the email and password object here. So let's see. So ID.unique, throw in a comma, credentials.email, and then credentials.password, or password1. There we go. Okay, so we create a user, and let's see, am I supposed to throw in a second password? No, okay, so we're throwing in the username too. So we'll just do credentials.name, and that's gonna be the last parameter here, so credentials. And I just realized we didn't add in a name for our user. We want our user to actually have a name here. So we're gonna set that up. Let's go ahead and just throw in that field real quick. That's going to be simple. We're going to take in this email field, and we're going to require that the user throw in a name first. We don't want unnamed users. This will be name, type is text, value is name, and then enter your name, credentials.name. We want to update our state, so we'll just go ahead and throw that in right here. Okay, so that checks out. We'll go back to our AuthContext. So in here, we're just going to register the user, and let's just see what happens. So let's just get the response. First of all, I want to check this out, because what I'm going to do right after is I want to log in the user. So we'll just say registered. Once the user is logged in, I don't want to force them to log in. I just want to automatically log them right in. What did I paste in here? Oh, response. Okay, so let's just check this out. Register. So we have a name. I'm like too zoomed in, so it's not letting me see it. So we'll just do Peter Pan at email.com. Password, we'll just create a password 123, and then password 123. Submit that. Passwords do not match. Really? We just did that. Password 123. Let's hope this matches. All right, there we go. So our user was created. So if I go back into my dashboard, we should see Peter Pan. Perfect. Awesome, so that works. So the next step here is just to go ahead and register our user. So all I'm gonna do is just go ahead and get the user account. So we'll just go ahead and call account.get, and then we'll set the user, and then we'll just redirect them. So once a user's good to go, no errors occurred, we'll just go ahead and repeat some of our code. We can just remove registered. We set the user, and then let's just call navigate and send the user to the actual home page. So we'll just take, actually I guess we can just write this out right here. Navigate, and we're redirecting the user back to the home page. So let's see, at this point, We can do Ted Lasso. That'll be the name. So Ted Lasso, just started watching that show. Not the biggest fan of it, but hey, it was a decent. Email.com. Password 123. Password 123. Should be redirecting me. Why does this not work? Line 74. Let's see. Account. Okay. Should have consoled out my account details. Okay. I know it. Okay. So let's see if it registered the user. If it registered, then it's just the login method. So, account.get. Okay, so account create. We create the user account right after we create. Oh, that's what it is. We have to create an email session. So we haven't created a session, so we try to get that too early. Got ahead of ourselves. So we're just going to go ahead and call await account dot create email session, and this is where we're just going to pass in credentials dot email and credentials dot password 1. I guess I could have just had a function that just logs a user in and then just started repeating that, but we're this far into it, so let's just work with it. Okay, password 1, there we go. Yeah, account create email session. We get the detail because we have the session. We set the user, and then we navigate and redirect that user. Let me think of another character. Ted Lasso, James Bond. Let's just do that. So James Bond, james@email.com. Password 123. Apparently James Bond isn't that secure. Password 123. Log in. There we go. All right. We have login, logout, user registration. What's next on the list? We're almost done here. Okay, so after we register a user, so what I want to do is I actually want to create, I want to start actually knowing what users created what, and I want to make sure that users can't just write messages and then delete anybody's message. So I want to make sure to fix this up here a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our room. So let's close out AuthContext, app.js. We don't need this anymore. We should be done with these pages. And let's go into our room page. And on create, we want to send some more data in our payload. So at this point, we have access to our users. So we're logged in. So what we could do is we can just go ahead and do const user from use auth. There we go. Got the import. So we have that user. So when we create this payload, we now have a user ID, user underscore ID, and we're just going to pass in user dot ID like this. And we also want to get the user name. So we can just do user dot name. Actually, what do I call it? I think I just called it user name like that. Let's just check real quick. Databases, production, collections, messages, username. So it's one word like that. So we're missing a comma there. So now I'm sending this information. So let's just see. So if we're logged in as James Bond, we're going to go ahead and just delete all these messages. Actually, I'm going to leave these because I want to throw in a little condition here. So we'll just do, hey there, got a mission for me. I'll be honest with you, I think I watched like one James Bond movie, so I don't really know anything about him. So we have this question, and we don't know who it's from. So let's go ahead and update this message here. So we'll modify the message here so that information should have been sent with it. So somewhere in the database, we should have it. If we look here, let's go into messages, user ID. Here we go. We see James Bond's message. Username as a string. I didn't save it. Why didn't do that? Okay, username, user dot username. Okay. This isn't making sense. Give me a second. What am I doing wrong here? Okay. User.name, yeah. Oh, yeah. So in the user field is just user.name. So the username is username. So let's just change that. And we'll send it. Then if we go into our messages, there we go. We see this message. And now we see James Bond. Okay, so we have the ID value, which is much more important because this value eventually should be dynamic. Let's say James Bond changes his name. We want that to update in the message. But for now, we're just going to store that as a string value, and then we'll, in maybe future tutorials, actually go through how to get that value because I have tested it with that. There's different options for how to do this. Okay, so inside of the actual message header, let's see. So I'm going to add a condition here, and I just want to check the user information. So let's see, we have our message header, and in here we have created at, and then, okay, so we haven't added in the name yet. So just above created at, let's just go ahead and add in a paragraph tag. We'll close it off here, and we're just gonna start typing in our message. So we'll just do, let's see. So if we have a message name, so message username, so we're going to check this condition, so we're just going to do username. So if we have this, then let's go ahead and output this user's name. We'll just throw in a span tag, span, and this is going to be, if I can finish this up, message.username, username, because that's how we store it in the message. And then if not, well, we can just go ahead and pass in anonymous user. And anonymous is one of those words I can never spell. If I do it slowly, I can do it, but in tutorials, it's like anon mouse or something. Yeah, yeah. That's why I don't type it in. So we're just gonna do that. And I guess at this point, I don't need the quotes there. Let's just check this out. So there we go, James Bond and anonymous user. Perfect. So that's working. For some reason, the timestamp, I don't like the way that looks. I think what I did in the demo app was actually take this tag right here, and I put this inside of this paragraph tag. So we have the span and the paragraph tag, or the span and the small text inside of the paragraph tag. So there we go. That looks a lot better. And let's see. After that, what I want to do is also just give users permission to delete their own messages. Okay, so we're going to change something up here real quick. So first of all, we're going to check user permissions. So let's see, inside of each message, I think we console out the messages there. So let's just see something. So if we look at the array of messages, we have these documents, you'll notice that there is this permissions array here. So permissions just tells me all the permissions of who can access this specific document and what can they do with it. Well, at this point, we're just letting anybody mess with it. So if we go back into our databases, into our messages collection, for our permissions, we just set up the, okay, what did I do? It goes back, we need to go back into settings. So what I set up here was permissions for anybody. Wow, I'm like a little bit loopy now. Okay, so here we go. We have permissions for any user. And I probably should just actually, here, I can refresh it. I didn't save this. So we have permissions for any user to create, read, update, and delete messages. Well, what we want to do is as we send a specific message, we want to give only users that, we want to give only authenticated users the ability to create and read a message, but only the creator of that specific message the ability to actually delete or update that message. So here's what we'll do. Let's go ahead and delete this any user. So now only authenticated users will be able to mess with our collections here. So at the collection level, we're going to say, okay, give users the ability to create and read messages. So that's fine. Now there's also this section that says document security. So when document security is enabled, users will be able to access documents for which they have been granted either document or collection permissions. So that's something we want. If the document security is disabled, users can access documents only if they have collection level permissions. So we do want to set this, and we basically want to say we're going to have collection level permissions and document level permissions. So if I go here, I still have the ability to read anybody's message, and I can still create a message. So those are my document level or my collection level permissions. So I can still see these messages. But when I create a message, let's go in here and we'll find this create message method, create document. So in here, the last parameter I can throw in here, let me just see how I did this in the demo, because that's a lot to remember in this tutorial. When we create this, what we're going to do is we're going to create a permissions array along with the payload. So we're just going to do let permissions, and we can set multiple permissions. And this is where we can even, hold on, give me a second, permissions. This is where we can even give like admin user permissions and so on. So at this document level, we can change up, maybe if we just have permissions, we can give another user access. This is where we can actually assign this. So this permissions array will be the last item in our create document post request here. So when we're sending this, or when we're calling this method, this is going to be the last item here. So what we can do here is we can actually import, let's see, we're going to import from Appwrite, and I already have the start of this query. I believe it's role and what was the other one? Role and permission. Okay, so we have to import these two things. So we're going to give our current user, as they're creating this role, a user, because they have the ability to create, can also assign document level permissions to a specific document. So in here, we're just going to pass in a few of these permissions. So somewhere here, just bear with me. Handle submit. Okay, so what we can do is we can just go ahead and do permission dot write. So write is going to be create, update, and delete. So writing to the database. And we're just going to say, okay, the person that has the permissions is going to be the role of a user. So we can also give permissions to a specific team. And we're just going to do the user dot ID. So the current user that just created, I know it took longer to explain that than it should, but I'm trying to remember this and best summarize this. The list of permissions we're going to send along is going to be right here, and the only permission we want to assign right now is going to be for the current user. So we want this user to have not just create and read function or abilities, we want this user to have also delete abilities. So let's go ahead and go back somewhere here. We'll save it, and let's just test this out. So right now, when James Bond says hi, we're going to see that this was created. And if we look at the permissions, now we see this user, so that's our current user, that's James Bond's ID. This user has the permission to update and delete. And because they already have the collection level permission to create, that doesn't need to be listed in here. So now what we can do is with this trash icon, we can check those permissions and then either render this out or not render this out. So if James Bond tries to delete this, hold on a second, that wasn't supposed to happen. Okay, let's see. Anonymous user. So let's try to delete this message. I'm supposed to get an error. Let's delete this one. Okay, so if I hit delete, okay, so user is not, that's weird. It's supposed to be in my console, but yeah, so it's working. It's saying, hey, you don't have permission to delete this. It doesn't even matter if James Bond created it, because this message right here, I believe, was created by James Bond, and we shouldn't have permission on this one either. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and just check this, and we're just going to go down to the message itself. Let's see, so wherever that trash icon is, we're just going to ask a question. Right here. Okay, so I'm going to need to reference some of my code here. So we're going to ask a question. So we're going to say, so if message dot permissions, if message permissions dot includes, and we're going to go ahead and pass in delete. So that's the delete permission, and we're just going to do. Actually, let's just go ahead and do this. Let's just copy the message. So we'll take that, and it was somewhere in here. So if the user has this specific permission, delete, we're going to go ahead and render out the trash icon. But this parameter right here needs to be the user.id value. So if we have it, then let's go ahead and render this out. So now we'll take this trash icon, so there's no need to even show it if they don't have permission. And let's just fix this indentation. Let's check this out. All right, so James Bond has the ability to delete this one right here. Why does this one have the ability? I guess we gave permission to that one. Oh, that's right, because, well, we'll see. Okay, so we'll just do 1, 2, and then let's log in as Dennis. Send the message. And there we go. So Dennis has the ability to delete his messages, and James Bond can delete his own. So Dennis cannot delete James Bond's messages. Okay, so let's see. We added that ability to delete our own messages, and that's it for this tutorial. Wow. Okay, so that was really exciting. I am super excited about Appwrite. I do have another tutorial coming out on my channel. I'm assuming I'm probably going to make some more with Brad here. Insanely excited about this technology. So look forward to more videos, and thank you for watching. Hope you feel proud of yourself for accomplishing this. I'll see you in another tutorial. Take care.